I'm interested to see how Patrick Mahomes looks. There's a beautiful thing called ankle tape. There's a beautiful thing called stim treatment that he's probably doing all week. And there's an even more beautiful thing called Toradol shots that he's probably not even going to be able to feel his ankle come the AFC Championship game. I don't think he's going to be as not mobile as he was last week. I think he's going to look a lot better, even though a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking that too. How do you feel like he's going to come out in this game? Or do you think it's going to be maybe he's 70% of what he usually is, Tank?
I mean, he's definitely not going to be 100%, and I think that's going to weigh on the offense a little bit. I want to make sure that I address
Yeah.
your comment like 100% because after going back and watching the film, I felt like Andy Reid's initial script to start the game was like a cheat code. Like the
Yeah.
Jacksonville Jaguars defense had zero answers. Patrick drove straight down the field and they got an easy touchdown. You're like, man, this is just going to be a blowout. But then you notice
Hmm.
a difference that once he injured his ankle, it became a little bit more difficult to move the ball. And I believe that is for one specific reason. Like if you go back and you watch the game, just notice how often Patrick Mahomes, he doesn't have to always just kind of run around and do some Fran Tarkenton type stuff. But look how
Hmm.
much he manipulates the pocket, moves around, and buys an extra second or two for Travis Kelsey and all those wide receivers to get open. And if you're gimpy and have a defensive coordinator like Lou Anarumo comes up with a scheme that you don't have those additional seconds in the pocket, then how's that going to impact the offense? So that's one thing I'm looking for in this matchup. Now, when I get to the Cincinnati Bengals offense, like Joe Burrow, man, that dude was so thorough. Like when he started that game against the Buffalo Bills, I mean, it was just like someone playing chess, and like he knew what every move was going to be before the defensive
Yeah.
coordinator Leslie Frazier knew. I mean, they were running the ball. He was get the snap and he'd just throw the ball out of his hands quick, and like he had an answer. And I thought that the Bills may try to give some twist and show that offensive line one front and then try to bring pressure from the other side just to try to confuse them and make Joe Burrow like hold the ball an extra second or get quick pressure. But they did none of that. It was just easy layups for the Bengals offense the entire time. And I have a feeling that based off what I saw from the Kansas City Chiefs defense on the first drive of the game where it was third down and they showed pressure to Trevor Lawrence from one side, brought it from the other, dropped back in the zone, and he had to kind of roll and scramble out of the pocket. And he almost threw an interception. I'm saying, okay, that's going to be the blueprint that they're going to try to use against Joe Burrow. Whether it be successful or not, I'm not sure. But I feel that
Hmm.
one thing that we can say is that even with Patrick Mahomes with a banged up ankle, that offense should be able to move the ball down the field and they should be able to put up some points. I think that based off watching Trevor Lawrence in that offense, there were some times when they stalled, but there were other times when they got hot and they moved the ball down the field like there was like a knife cutting through butter. And one thing I want to point out too, before I pass over to Jared, like we know it's Trevor Lawrence, where Chris Collinsworth was saying that he overthrew Christian Kirk, but Christian Kirk dropped the ball. Like best believe Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase won't miss. So when you give those opportunities to that offense, they're going to connect. And so you look at it from that standpoint, Cincinnati's ready to throw some points on the board. Kansas City, even with a hobble, Patrick Mahomes should be able to put some points on the board. And I think that eventually we will see that reflected in the total where it started off at 47 and a half, and I think it's back at 47 right now. I wouldn't be surprised that as
Hmm.
we notice to see Patrick Mahomes practicing throughout the week, people start to buy it up a little bit.
Yeah, Jared, this is one thing that we talked about too last week is the O-line. You love talking about the trenches. Everyone was worried how Cincinnati's O-line was going to look last week. They ran the ball 34 times for 172 yards and Joe Burrow was only sacked once. I mean, they were averaging 5.8 yards per carry before garbage time. Like their O-line looked really really good. And I look back at the regular season game between the Chiefs and the Bengals, and the Bengals won that game because they controlled the clock. Joe Burrow was great on third downs. The ground game looked really good, and that was without Joe Mixon. And the defense had a big takeaway, and that was with Patty Mahomes at 100%. So if they come out and play a similar game that they did during the regular season with Patrick Mahomes maybe being only at 70%, and you add Joe Mixon to the lineup, and their O-line played like they did last week, it's hard to come up with the fact that, hey, Kansas City might win this game besides the fact that they're playing at home, right? I don't know. It's hard for me to make an argument, but what do you feel?
I guess I'll start with the total really quick. I mean, I've got a lot on this game, and I want to make sure I get to it because it's just there's so many nuances here because this is the fourth time that they faced off in the last 2 years. I mean, they're basically divisional
Yeah.
opponents at this point. And 3 of those 4 games, high stakes. The game in week 17 last year was not as high stakes. Obviously, 2 AFC Championship games. And then the game in week 13, you had that AFC Championship rematch vibe to it. And it was very much high stakes poker between, I would say right now, maybe the best offensive mind of all time, Andy Reid, and arguably one of the best defensive minds of this current season, Lou Anarumo. And that chess match is fascinating, and I'll get into some details there. But the total has, as you said, vacillated a lot, as has the spread with the Patrick Mahomes news. Based off of what we're hearing today, my assessment on Mahomes' situation right here on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern or Pacific, as we record this, I think he's going to be fine. Obviously, he'll be slightly less mobile than his usual self, but everything I'm seeing, everything I'm reading, he's a little nicked up, and he's going to grit it out, and he's going to play. He still has a top 5 offensive line. He still has Andy Reid, and he still has, I think, one of the better complements of weapons in the NFL. So this is the rare opportunity where we actually get to buy low on the Chiefs. The Mahomes tax, because of the ankle, has been removed. So this is a fair price. If anything, I would say there's a little value on Kansas City as an underdog. My guess is this closes Chiefs -1-ish and 47.5-ish come Sunday once he's announced in and everything's good. So I still think there's a little upside here to betting the Chiefs as an underdog and betting the over. But I kind of think the under might be the way to go once we get to game day and it pushes up. Because I do think 4th matchup in the last 2 years. And Lou Anarumo is just a freaking dog, man. So let me go into some of the numbers on Anarumo and how he made adjustments on the Bengals and other teams this year. Because we talk about that all the time. Lou Anarumo, he makes these great adjustments, great defensive coordinator. What does that really mean? Well, the numbers, the season-long data on Cincinnati says they really struggle against slot receivers. They're actually one of the worst teams in the NFL defending the slot. They give up over 9 yards per pass against slot receivers compared to just 6.5 yards per pass against wide receivers. Well, where does Travis Kelce line up more than any other player on the Chiefs? In the slot. He has the most slot receiving snaps of any player on their roster. Well, in the game against Kelce in week 13, he had his worst game of the year. He lined up in the slot 17 times, targeted just 5 times, 4 receptions, 56 yards. He also fumbled. Again, it was his worst game of the year. And this is a Bengals team that historically this season gives up a ton of yards to slot receivers. But in that game, Anarumo made the adjustment. So what did he do? Well, he put free safeties and corners, his best cover guys, Bates, Hilton, Bell, in the slot against Kelce. The only time Kelce got free in that game was when he was matched up against the middle linebacker, Logan Wilson. He had a big, arrow route over the middle for about 30 yards. The rest of those guys, Bates, Hilton, and Bell, 3 targets, 2 catches, 19 yards. So just a little tweak. You take the linebacker out of the slot, you bring your best safety, your best cover corner into the slot to guard Kelce, and you saw the adjustment. We'll see how that chess match plays out in this game. We'll see if Kelce goes out and plays wide. Maybe he's in the backfield. Who freaking knows with Andy Reid? He could line them up anywhere, but it's going to be a chess match, and I think that favors unders more. I think that favors the defenses more because I do think Lou has got a beat on how to defend Travis Kelce at his best. I also think that means it could be like a Kadarius Toney game or a Isaac Pacheco game. Somebody else on the Chiefs offense, I think, is going to have a big game in order for Kansas City to win. I don't think Kelce's going to have 14 targets, 12 catches, and God knows how many yards like he did last week against the Jags. So there's going to be some change-ups. There's going to be some interesting wrinkles that Andy Reid's going to have to throw into the mix. But I do think big picture, this is not going to be a Travis Kelce game. On the other side of the ball, Lauren, you nailed it. The advanced numbers on Burrow were unbelievable last week considering the offensive line. He was only pressured on 28% of dropbacks. That's the lowest of any quarterback all weekend. 41% of his attempts traveled 10 or more yards downfield. Remember, we're thinking to ourselves, oh, bad offensive line. Joe's not going to be able to push it down the field. That wasn't true at all. He had plenty of time, and he pushed almost half of his attempts over 10 yards down the field. So I don't know how it's possible that the Bengals offensive line played that well. You could argue that the Bills defensive front is a shell of its former self, and that's a reason why. But you could also argue that maybe this Bengals offensive line just manned up. Jackson Carman at left tackle had a good game. He's going to have to play well again this week. And I don't think Alex Kappa at right guard is going to play either. So it's going to have to be Sharping again at guard. And I don't know what we see from that Bengals offensive line. I do know Chris Jones and Frank Clark are really good. And I think they're going to give Joe some problems up front. And I think those two guys might be the elixir to how good the Bengals offensive line faced. But I will say this as well. Jamar Chase, that's the guy I would target. The Chiefs 31st in DVOA against number one wide receivers this year. Jamar Chase in 3 games against the Chiefs, 29 targets, 25 catches, 417 yards, 4 touchdowns in 3 games against the Chiefs. And again, these games can go either way. Cincinnati's won 3 straight. In all 3 games, Kansas City had a win probability above 75% in the fourth quarter. They could have won all 3 games, but they didn't. This is going to be a chess match. This is going to be a tight game. I can't wait for this one. I really can't. It's going to be an absolute gem.